Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Wellness Wednesdays with Stephanie, and I am delighted to be chatting with Amanda Freed today. How are you today, Amanda? Thanks for joining me.
Oh, Stephanie, thank you for having me. I'm great. I'm excited to be with you. I'm excited to be inside because it's going to be 110 today.
Oh, yeah. Gotta love that Arizona heat. They say it's a dry heat, but now we're in monsoon season, so it's not so much a dry heat right now, is it?
It's all the things. It's all the things. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. But, life here in Arizona has been quite amazing. And you and I have both been developing some really awesome things here. So I'd love to hear what you've been up to. If you can give us a little introduction.
Sure. Well, I'll start with me, right? Like who I am and sort of how I got here. And I've been a body worker for over 36 years and a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher for 25 years. And I had a really special birthday this past year. I'm 60 now. And I feel like all of those worlds are coming together in this really beautiful way. Because everything I've done, I love the science of. I love the science of massage therapy. I love the science of yoga. I love the science of meditation. My mother would say, thanks, Mom. I always like to know from where the feet grow. Like I'm always looking inside of things. And so my love right now is polyvagal theory. And I know it's kind of been a buzzword out there, but still a lot of people haven't heard much about it. And the beautiful piece for me is that it's all of my worlds coming together. It's the anatomy geek in me and the spiritual side and the emotional side coming all together. And
That is beautiful. Oh, I love it. I love it. So why did this particular theory resonate so deeply, other than the fact that obviously it connects everything? Was it something about your life or what you were experiencing that grabbed you?
oh man, you go right in, huh? Yeah, and I have the inability to not be transparent and authentic. So here you go. So I'm always doing a lot of self-work, somato-emotional work. The pandemic helped me to be in four walls for a long time. So I did a lot of studying. I did a lot of online courses, somatic embodiment. So really kind of furthering my own education. And then the culmination of that, there's this beautiful movie out called The Wisdom of Trauma with Gabor Mate. And I watched that. And because again, I'm always working on myself, my generation, we grew up with a lot of trauma. Everybody I know really grew up with a lot of trauma. I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s and, divorce and estrangement and stuff like that. And so I watched The Wisdom of Trauma and I absolutely loved it. I was enamored of the whole thing. And at the same time, at the end, it felt like something was missing for me. That okay, how long are we going to replay our trauma and replay it and know that we have it? And okay, now what? What do we do about it? And that's when I started to go further and study Stephen Porges and Deb Dana and all the people that are saying, hey, some of that stuff is stuck in your body. And here are some things that we can do about it.
That is beautiful. So what do you think was the biggest aha moment for you when you started practicing? Because I know you probably brought it into your body and started practicing this theory, right?
Well, the beautiful thing as a yoga teacher for over 25 years was I was listening to Stephen Porges, and I want to quote him properly. And he said that he gives you all these sort of examples of things we can do and how we can sort of do some vagal toning. And we'll talk about the vagus nerve and all that. And he said that yoga is a sophisticated system of vagus nerve toning. And I went, wait a minute, I already have that tool. And it was so beautiful because it gave so much validity to, you walk out of a yoga class and you feel that. You don't even know why. It's not like any other exercise. I mean, other exercise releases endorphins. It feels good. There's something different about yoga.
Yeah, that is beautiful. What an amazing thing to find some science to help support pranayama and the breathing practices that bring us into that balance and peace. I love it.
And even all the asanas affect that part of the body, that part of the nervous
Exactly. All the muscles and everything around that area. Absolutely. That is so cool.
And to have that
So-
validated by a major scientist who's doing this work, I'm like, you just validated yoga. Wait a minute.
That is so awesome. He needs more credit. That is amazing. I would love to give our audience a definition. So polyvagal theory is a big word, right? So let's give them a little bit of a breakdown. What is it?
What is it? What is going on? So, and I love and hate the fact that it's theory, right? Because the fact is all science is theory.
Sure.
You know, we'll prove something and then we'll disprove it. It's not because we were wrong. It's because we learned something different, right? So at this point, we work with polyvagal theory. And to break it down, that's the big sort of umbrella. To break it down is we're just looking at the vagus nerve, right? Which is part of the parasympathetic system. So to even back it up a little further, we look at the nervous system, right? We have the autonomic nervous system, which just means we don't have control of it, right? It's autonomic. We have the sympathetic side, we have the parasympathetic side. And what we knew previously was that the sympathetic was fight or flight, and the parasympathetic side was your rest and digest. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. We're learning more things, right? So we're going to leave the sympathetic alone, the fight or flight, for a moment. And we're just going to focus on what we call the parasympathetic system, which previously we knew as our rest and digest, our freeze. Now we're adding more words, right? Rest, digest, fight or flight. That's your sort of relaxed state, right? That's when well, that's what we thought. But now we understand that part of us, you know, some of us, when we get nervous, when we get scared, or when we're in trauma, we go into this fight or flight mode, right? We're going to, all the adrenaline rushes and the pupils dilate and the hair stands up so we look bigger. Some of us, though, do the opposite. We will freeze, or now we're calling it fawn, right? Even sort of play dead. There are people that when they're upset, when they're in trauma, they can't get off the couch. They can't get out of the bed. Right. So the parasympathetic system isn't always online, we say, isn't always. And when it's not in line, it can look a lot, in some people, like the sympathetic system. It can even have some agitation to it. So previously, we would look and not really know where somebody was at. We call these states dysregulation, right? So when the parasympathetic system is offline, it's in dysregulation, but it could look different for different people. So some people might get a little jittery, or again, some people might just kind of get floppy, right? Let's say they get floppy. And so that's kind of the overview of what this autonomic nervous system is and does.
Okay. Awesome. Okay.
So now,
so then the how-to. So you said it's complex. So are there multiple practices that go into this theory?
100%. The other thing that was fascinating to me as an anatomist is where it is. So the vagus nerve. So now we say polyvagal theory, but we're actually looking at the vagus nerve, VAGUS, which comes out of the bundle of the 7th cranial nerves. So the really interesting piece about this, Stephanie, is that where it goes, right? So it innervates the trigeminal nerve, which goes into your face. So your eyes, your mouth. Now it comes down into your throat, trigeminal, it's your hearing as well. It goes into your throat. So the swallowing, you ever get nervous or upset and you can't swallow or you can't speak? Into the chest, the lungs, when the breathing feels tight or occluded. Now it goes down into the digestive organs, right? Oh, I have stomach upset. I'm upset, something bothers me. Now my stomach is churning, goes down into the diaphragm, into the breathing muscles. So that was the light bulb moment for me. It's like, oh, this is where it goes. And these are all the systems that indicate to us what might be going on.
Wow. So that somatic awareness and that, awareness of what's going on in the body. How can I get in and pay attention a little bit more to what my body's doing and be more present to it and allow my consciousness or my ego to quiet down a little bit so I can listen.
And others, right? Like I see you this morning and you have this beautiful smile on your face. And, and even before, I'm going to tell one of your secrets, like before we started to record, you connected with your breath.
Mm-hmm.
It was vagal toning.
Yeah.
Right? Because you've done some work, you know how to do stuff. You may not have had a name for, oh, I'm toning my vagus nerve right now. But we do that, right? And so I have a whole presentation on this. And one of my slides is actually Charlie Brown, because I love Charlie Brown. And you can see on his face. So if we came on here today, I would also know if you weren't feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
You see a friend and you can tell, like you can read all over them what's going on. That's that vagus nerve innervating the trigeminal nerve.
Wow.
Your face is already telling us how you're feeling.
Huh. Wow. Oh, I love science. This is so cool.
You know, some people, you ever know somebody who's got a permanent frown or what
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a permanent frown? Their trauma's right there on their face.
Wow. So speaking of trauma, so you mentioned that this is a practice for trauma recovery. Mm-hmm. So how does that work? I mean, I know that, there's so many different theories about trauma and how to recover from trauma and different things you can do. And definitely also a very hot topic lately, trauma recovery and shadow work and all this stuff. So definitely relevant to what everyone is thinking right about now. Let's talk a little bit about trauma. What are we talking about?
Everything, anything. I say this in my workshops that animals, the animal kingdom, their fight or flight, their trauma responses or freeze and fawn tend to kick in when they're truly in danger. But for us, because we're emotional animals, right? The animal kingdom isn't so much. They didn't get teased at school. They didn't, have the same types of trauma. So we are, most of us, many of us are in that heightened awareness all the time. In fact, it's Gabor Mate that talks about, and this was amazing for me, that adult onset ADHD is a trauma response. Because in our childhood, in my childhood, I maybe had to keep everybody calm, right? So if I have to do this again and again and again, I'm always in a state of alert. Mm-hmm. And so we're saying that it rests in the body. It stays kind of stuck in that nervous system, in that part of the nervous system.
Wow.
Right. So we've got all this memory, but it's there. And I joke about, a lion gets into that fight or flight or freeze or fawn when his life is truly in danger. We get there when somebody's too slow at a red light or when somebody writes a check in the supermarket. Because we're already there. Mm-hmm. And we haven't, if you'll see a lion after the hunt, he's panting. This is seen in many different animals right now. They have all these systems. That panting is actually a reset of the vagus nerve. They're releasing that energy. Yeah. And because we don't recognize that in ourselves, or we aren't taught to, we don't have these, and I'm going to use this word, simple little tools that we can rely on to reset ourselves.
Beautiful. I think that we are coming into this awareness in such a perfect time because so many people are now awake and they're aware of their trauma, and they're like, okay, now what? Now I know my trauma's here. What do I do about it? You
Well,
know,
and
so
like I said, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I like to say my growing up took a few decades. And it was all about analysis. And you would just go and like years and just reiterating this. So to your point, when we ask about trauma, vagal toning is not about the trauma. It's because we don't want to replay it, because then it's re-traumatizing. And that's what's
exactly.
been happening, I think, in recent years, rather than going, this is how I like, perfect example. I get up this morning. Usually my biggest problem with any sort of presentation or interview is like, what am I going to wear today? So I know. And so you don't get to see my say, I'm wearing my favorite shorts right now, because that for me is grounding. I have my cup of tea. I think you have your, so I have to look at it and go, oh my God, this is traumatized. No. What are those practices that I can do right now to ground me, to make me feel good? And so once we start to just engage in these practices, and these are physical practices,
Mhm.
that we're not going back into the mental, as a meditation teacher, we're not going back into the mental loop. What if I just tried this practice? What if I just ground myself and look around the room, drink something warm, wear my favorite
Mhm.
pants? So we're
Right.
looking at this from a whole different perspective, not even from a trauma perspective at all.
Wow, that's amazing. I have an experience that I after months and months and months of practicing yoga, I was getting back into my yoga body, and I was losing all this weight and getting healthy. I had an experience on the yoga mat during the final relaxation where I released the shame of the 12-year-old in my body who hated her body because I was overweight. I released it, and I acknowledged the 12-year-old in that final meditation. I was like, just releasing, and I understood that it was time and it was okay to let it go. And what an amazing experience. So it was probably the polyvagal nerve relaxing the trauma away from probably my throat chakra, because that's where the shame sits right here, right? And we speak it all the time. I realized after releasing that shame how much I was ruling my life on this consciousness of shame and guilt without even being aware of it. So talk about trauma and how it affects us on a day-to-day, man. So
And if
I
I
would
was a
love,
betting person, I would say you probably didn't walk into that classroom that day, that yoga studio, and go, I'm going to release my 12-year-old trauma today.
nope. Nope, nope. So I would love to give our audience some tools, a couple of polyvagal tools to get into their own bodies and start to experience these healing experiences that you and I have both had.
Yeah. First one first, heart holding. It's something that we do naturally, but
Mhm.
it's not necessarily something we do intentionally. So my story, one of my stories a few years ago, X amount of years ago, X amount of breakups ago, had a big breakup, and it was devastating to me. And I started on a path of self-love. And I was
Mm.
listening to Marianne Williamson at the time, and she has these beautiful practices about self-talk and how you talk to yourself. And at the same time, I started a heart holding practice. So what you do is, and this is, I do it a little differently than other people, and I have a meditation that goes with it. It's actually on YouTube, this meditation, somewhere on my YouTube channel. So you place I like to do my right hand first over your heart, and then you place your left hand on it. And it's not like a Pledge Allegiance hand where it's sort of sideways. So the fingers go right up toward that notch, right? The clavicular notch. And then left hand goes, and you really hold on to your heart rather firmly. And you're really pressing in as if you had another loved one that was coming toward you and you knew they were in pain and you wanted to hold them so dearly that they knew that you were there for them. But we don't do this for ourselves. So this is the simplest for me, the heart holding practice. And I'll tell you, I started this a few years ago when I was in really kind of dire straits. And you can just breathe into it. So when you connect with your breath here, and we're not forcing the breath in any way, please don't ever force yourself to take a deep breath. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Just breathe how feels appropriate to you. You can maybe send that breath up into your hands. Think about that your hands are supporting the width of that breath. You might add a little mantra if you feel comfortable to do so. I like to say I'm safe, I am worthy, I am loved. And really breathe into that. And it can be a fake it till you make it. You might not believe it for a while, and that's fine. Or you don't have to say the mantra, just notice how it feels to hold yourself in this way. So that for me, if there was a number one go-to, I would
Beautiful.
say, yeah.
I love this. I've never done this before, and my body is like, it feels so nice.
When you take your hands away, you can still feel that support and warmth.
Yeah.
The story part of it, I started to do this practice, and now years later, I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm in that position. Very often, very often. So this self-care, vagus nerve toning becomes habit.
Beautiful.
So
and as well it should. I think these are skills that we should be teaching children so that they know how to adjust themselves when they have an emotional response, or how to settle down when they're feeling overwhelmed. It would be great.
Here's the beautiful part. Children already know.
Somatic awareness. Definitely.
They do this.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter would do, they signal to themselves. This is also tapping. I teach tapping, EFT tapping. It's a very similar thing. But for me, the hold is just really super supportive. So that would be, for me, that is, and here's, I always say this, don't wait till the house is on fire to go out and buy a fire extinguisher. So these practices, I'm not feeling anxious. I'm not going to do that. Perfect. Do it when you're not feeling anxious so that it's set in when you do need it.
Exactly. It's interesting because I wasn't feeling super anxious before I started doing it, but afterwards I was like, actually, maybe I was feeling a little bit. Even just this activity, getting online, recording a podcast, it's a little stressful. It might be stress, but still there's some stress in my body. I'm a little anxious. So having practices as a business owner or a motivational speaker, someone who gets on stage, being able to calm yourself right before you step on the stage. What a beautiful thing.
Just that's a self-love. To me, that's just a very, very intense, important self-love practice. And I just want to touch on that breath thing. When we talk, there's all this out here about trauma-informed this, trauma-informed that. And then I'll get into a class and they'll go, now take a deep breath. And I'm like, rah. When we talk about the vagus nerve, when we talk about polyvagal toning, when we talk about where trauma sits, sometimes you can't take a deep breath. If the trauma sits right here, where it often does, if you're trying to push and force a breath past it, you might be tripping or triggering a trauma.
Oh, wow.
So this idea of trauma informed gives the client, the patient, the student, the human, the permission to know and the autonomy to know what is right for them in the moment. Right? And so, and I want to really importantly, that was just one practice. Again, there's all types of breathing practices, pranayama. don't do it if it doesn't work for you. You know, you're an individual. If something doesn't feel right, don't should all over yourself.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel right, throw it out. There's a million practices. But I just want to touch on this idea of dysregulation.
Okay.
And the knowledge of where we're at. Like as I said before, dysregulation could either look like heightened, I know myself. When I go into trauma, I'm going to clean the whole house. I'm going to get a million things accomplished. I'm going to run around. And now I look and I go, oh, sweetheart, you're in trauma. That busyness, that work. So I am a person that would more often than not get what we call upregulated.
Okay.
The good practices for me in that time would be the heart holding, a warm drink, some comfort foods, some soft music, kind eyes, kind low tones, slower breath, because I'm a person that gets upregulated when I'm dysregulated. So I am learning to recognize myself. If you, let's say you are a person that gets downregulated, that when you're in trauma, you get sleepy, or you allow people to walk over you, or you can't speak, or you can't do your day, you can't shower. You would want to implement the opposite things. You would want louder, quicker music, maybe. You might want to dance a little bit. You might eat something crunchy, right? Where I would have something warm and soothing, you might want some crackers or some carrots or something like that. So you see, it's important to know who you are in the moment. And that can change, and what your tools are, because your tools are going to be different. Same with yoga poses, right? A big back bend is going to be up regulating. Forward bends are going to be down regulating.
Interesting. Okay.
I so want to know what that the poses you were doing the day that you had that big release.
Oh, I wish I remembered. It was in 2012. So it's been a long time. But honestly, around that time is when I had all of those aha moments about yoga and about healing and about healing humanity and detoxifying and all the things that I wanted to write about. So that was a big year for me. Awesome. So are there any other practices that you'd like to share with our audience?
Again, you mentioned pranayama, which is, we know it as breath work or breathing practices. Caveat, Iyengar wrote a book. He wrote kind of the Bibles on breath work, light on yoga and light on pranayama. And he's just very radical. He was very radical yogi, amazing, one of our most important teachers. And pranayama, if you don't do it right, it's actually called pranayama. If you don't do it right, you could die. And it's like, okay, everybody calm down. But again, just the caveat of, we say you breathe and know that you're breathing. So at first, not to put a trauma-informed practice would say, don't put the emphasis on this is how to do it right, or do this 6, 7, 8 breath, or this counted breath. Sometimes it's too much for people and it can induce more stress and trauma. So we just say, pay attention to the breath, because the breath is also telling you where you're at in the moment.
Definitely. Okay.
And I promise, just by paying attention to it, it changes on its own. It's a 2-year-old. We just want the attention. The same with meditation. I have a meditation practice every single morning, every single day of my life. I teach meditation. I offer that to people in a very humanistic type of way. No hours and hours of meditation, no quieting the mind. Trying to quiet the mind is a myth. Not going to work, not going to happen. So meditation, breathing, but just in these very trauma-informed humanistic ways. I'll give you another little practice. It's orienting yourself. We call it orienting or grounding. that you literally just sit and you use your eyes. You find a window, you find a door. So, our trauma babies want an exit, want to know that we're not trapped where we are. Because sometimes this dysregulation can also look like dissociation. So we find a window, and do this right now, find a door. And usually we try to just use our eyes at first. We look down at the floor. We look up at the ceiling. We look left. We look right. So it brings us into the moment, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. And then here's a fun practice. You actually trace the room with just your eyes. Some say eyes in a circle, but I go left side of the floor. So I'm just tracing the wall in front of me. So left side floor, trace up to ceiling, across ceiling to right, down to right side of the wall to the floor, across the floor. So you're actually making a big square with your eyes. So we look down left, up, across, down right, across the floor, to the left, up. So what we're doing is, remember, vagus nerve, trigeminal, the eyes. We're sort of getting them online. And then you can do the same things with the head. You can, if you're down regulated, you can, any type of tapping works. So we're just orienting the body, because when we're in trauma, most of trauma, in the moment, they say stress is about the future. We're worried about the future. Depression's about the past. So what we're doing with these eye exercises or the tapping is we're trying to bring ourselves into present moment. Because for most of us, most of the time, present moment is really okay. Like you in that class, you weren't experiencing trauma in the moment, but you ticked off some really old past trauma. So if we get ourselves in the now with as many of our senses as possible, the now is usually pretty okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share about polyvagal theory and trauma recovery?
Yeah, that 7 hours or so worth. But yes, that it's really accessible. And I love one of my favorite things is that we're not recycling and readdressing trauma, right? We are owning our body as it is now. That trauma can't have my body anymore, right? And like the really important caveat, I believe very strongly in counseling and having the support, if you're really going through trauma, if you're really ticking up old stuff, that you have that professional support behind you. I'm not a trauma therapist. I am not a counselor. I am not a therapist. I can help people in their bodies with meditation, with yoga, with new practices. But, I've always, I've always had a meditation practice and a counselor, and they're separate. They go together beautifully. So I really want to support people in doing their physical health and their mental, emotional health as well.
Definitely. Okay. Can you give us a final thought? Anything else you'd like to send our listeners away with some inspiration?
Wellness, happiness is our birthright. That self-compassion and self-care is really the highest aspiration that I have for human beings. That that self-compassion is your gift to the world. Self-compassion is your gift to the world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amanda. Oh, this is so beautiful. So how can people reach you?
Okay. I always think I'm all over plastered everything. I guess I'm not, this technology thing. So I do have a YouTube channel. I think it's Amanda Freed Meditation. Everything is on my website, amandafreedmeditation.com. So you can reach me through there, amandafreedmeditation.com. Send me a little message. I work with people one-on-one. I do presentations and workshops on this and about 50 other topics, conscious communication, self-compassion, self-care. I have a little book of just quotes. It's called Divinely Flawed and Wildly Amused. You can get that from me or on, yeah, it's just little inspirational quotes, but even something like that, it's like, I'm just going to open this to feel better for a moment. So AmandaFreed25@gmail is me. I love, like I said, working with people one-on-one, doing huge presentations, yoga, meditation retreats. I would love to hear from people and just love to chat with people about this stuff.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is so, so, so good. I'm so excited to share this with our lovely listeners. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the platform and the opportunity and the love and the practices we've got to do together.